Meeting to order. This is the Wolfeboro Planning Board, Tuesday, January 19th, 2021. My name is Kathy Barnard, and I'm the chairman of the Planning Board. Some of the Planning Board members are here in person, and others are participating virtually by GoToMeeting. The public can also watch the proceedings or participate in GoToMeeting through the login information that's on the town website. If there are issues with logging in, please get in touch with the planning director at wolfeboronh.us. The first item on the agenda is to do a roll call vote for attendance. Susan Replier.
Here.
Mike Hodder.
Present.
John Thurston.
Here.
Brad Harriman.
Here.
Von Dugan.
Here.
Peter Goodwin.
Here.
And Julie Jacobs. Here. Our alternate. Thank you. And also present is Tavis Austin, the planning director. The first item on the agenda is a public hearing. This is an amendment to the shorefront residential district. It's very brief. Basically, it's an amendment to 175-67 C1, and this is the shorefront lot improvement standards. Basically, what we're doing this evening is to put back into the amendment for the shorefront residential district the word primary. Previously, we had a public hearing where we had removed that word. However, it was brought to our attention that would then make any boathouse non-conforming and would require boathouses to obtain a variance. That was not the intent of any changes to this section of the zoning regulations. Basically, all we're trying to do with the amendments that have been proposed is to encourage people to focus on stormwater runoff when they're developing properties in the shorefront residential district. So, what the way this will read with the amendment is all primary structures must be set back at least 50 feet from the reference line. Board members, did you have any comments that you wanted to make before I open the public hearing?
Madam, I'm sorry, maybe my ears are clogged, but I'm having a hard time hearing you.
You're having a hard time hearing me? Okay, sorry about that. Did you have a question?
No question, I'm just having a hard time hearing you.
Okay. All right, if there are no questions from the board members, then I'll open the public hearing. Is there any member of the public that wanted to comment on this change? This proposed change will need to go on the town warrant, the 2021 town warrant. Okay, if there is no public wanting to comment on the change, planning board members, do you have any additional comments?
I'd be happy to move this article, this amendment, to the 2021 warrant.
Okay, there's a motion to move this item to the 2021 town warrant. Somebody want to second them?
Seconded.
Motion has been made and seconded. I'll do a roll call vote to vote in favor of this proposal. Susan Replier?
Yes.
Mike Hodder?
Yes.
John Thurston,
Yes.
Brad Harriman,
Yes.
Von Dugan,
Yes.
Peter Goodwin,
Yes.
and Kathy Barnard. I'll vote in favor of the amendment. Okay, thank you, folks. Are you hearing me
Yeah,
better
that's much better, thanks.
without them? Okay. All right. Okay. The next item is the Master Plan Implementation Committee update. Let's see, who should we go to? We're going to go ahead to Tavis then.
Sure, I'd be happy to start with this.
Okay.
Master Plan Implementation Committee, consisting of Kathy, myself, and Susan, got together and understood that the master plan has been adopted. There's a master plan implementation matrix included with that document. And then the charge became, well, how do we tackle the, I'll say several hundred at least, items, various levels of implementation. You probably recall putting them together. There's high, medium, low effort associated with the various implementation strategies or those activities that are thought to be furthering the goals and initiatives of the master plan. So the target group was to take each of the master plan chapters, if you will, transportation, housing, infrastructure, et cetera, and have each of those subcommittees, each of the subcommittees that worked on those particular sections, pick from their section of the master plan implementation matrix what the top 3 goals are. So earlier today I sent out an email that is, I'll say, the raw data version, which anyone who tried to print found it a little cumbersome to read, if not see. But what we did was break it down so that the highest priority is red. This is very tricky color scheming. The second priority is orange, and the third priority is yellow. And what I'm going to do is share a screen. Once I get to the right screen, just so the people at home can follow along with the hard copy that's in front of the members here. The text is still a little small, and all I've done in this, as you're aware, Susan sent out the email to each of the subcommittees and said, pick your top 3. She then went through and color-coded with the priorities. And then in order to make this viewable as best we can tonight, I chopped out the raw data, and what you have in front of you is the printout of what's on the screen that goes through, excuse me, the goal and or sub-goal, depending on which group you're looking at. What is perhaps a little hard to follow just because of the pagination here, but to give you an overview, and then I'll let Susan take over for her part of this. I have to make more things disappear on my screen here. There we go. And the far right-hand column is what group we're talking about. So on the hard copy, if you turn the page, on the top of the second page, far right-hand side, you'll see Arts and Heritage. So that's the first chapter in the master plan. And then for those scrolling along at home, you can see just above Community Facilities is Arts and Heritage. I don't necessarily believe it's imperative for board members to commit these to memory, other than to generally say, okay, we see where each of the particular groups is, or where each particular group's position statement is, on, if you will, on what their 3 target areas are, and then as a board, we're asked the Master Plan Implementation Committee to come up with recommendations for next steps. So that's what I have at this point.
Okay, so how are we going to proceed? I'm not sure.
Well,
So-
I guess it's a question, now that each of the groups has identified their top 3 priorities, what would the planning board like me to report back to the implementation committee and or to each of these subgroups? Having attended a number, it feels like a number, at least 2 EDC meetings, I know that they already have developed their own subcommittees based on their top 3 priorities, and they have working groups working on their top three priorities, and before they take official action, they'll come back and either get input from the selectmen or the planning board, as the case may be. in my mind, it would be imperative to perhaps have the Master Plan Implementation Committee meet, go over the top 3, literally get it down to the 3 from each group, see if there are any common themes, and see if there are different work groups that could be put together. So instead of having EDC focus on EDC isms, if you will, it might also benefit from having additional planning board help or transportation committee help or what have you, depending on those goals. I also think it would be advantageous for the Master Plan Implementation Committee to come back to this body and say, these seem to be the big themes. We would recommend the planning board look at the following things to make sure our regulations are staying up to pace to allow these policies to be carried out. Or these are the work groups that are overarching these work areas. Does that make sense?
Okay, go ahead, Mike.
2 comments. First, traditionally the master plan implementation matrix has assigned specific goals to specific agencies who are supposed to do them, rather than looking for big picture themes across different groups that worked on parts of the master plan. Each individual section of the master plan held a particular organization responsible for fulfilling their suggestions, their recommendations that group made in the master plan. So the idea of having a thematic approach to all of the goals in the master plan is good, and it's one that we hadn't done before, but I don't think we should lose sight of the original plan, which was to hold individual agencies responsible for individual projects per chapter of the master plan. Second comment, and maybe I should hold this off until we get into the nitty-gritty of the thing, but looking over the community facilities section of this presentation, it doesn't exactly reflect what John and I had expected it would, so we need to have some discussions there.
Okay, well, that was because you said a list, but it wasn't from the community, so I went through and picked out 3.
Oh, okay. Well, I had checked with John, and I think I also checked with Julie.
Okay, I didn't think I was that far off the mark. But
No.
we can
I'm
talk
just
about that.
just getting to it, Madam Chairman. That back in October, I sent an email to, I believe, Susan and possibly you. I believe Susan, and correct me if I'm wrong, with the recommendations made by the Community Facilities Chapter team, which we felt were the most important.
Oh, okay, all right, well, we can...
And I don't see them
The
on this.
reason we're having this meeting is to develop
Okay. If
the
you,
way that we're going to proceed, so that's good. But,
if you'd like, I can resend these to you tomorrow, so you'll have the top 3, actually the top 6 that we came up with, that you can look over.
Okay, but can we just, Vaughn, do you want to, you folks came up with 3. Do you want to comment on where you are with those and how you went about it?
Sure. We polled the group, but actually our 3 are our first 3 goals, and that's kind of logical. They were the most important when we drafted the chapter, and they're still the most important. And we have at least 2 people on each one of these subsections. But our chief concern in discussion was if you just look at right here, 1.1, how are we coordinating with the EDC and the BOS and the chamber, so that the EDC isn't run off in one direction, Heritage another, and we'll, start crossing sites, if you will.
Right.
So, Madam Chairman, if I may, I attended that same Heritage meeting that Vaughn is referring to, and I believe what I suggested to Heritage was that if it's in your chapter, as Mike suggested in his first comment, if it says Chamber, EDC, Heritage, and BOS, but it's in the arts and culture, it's Heritage, primarily. But it's that very conversation that led to my comment, that led to Mike's first comment. There might be themes in here. There might be I appreciate Mike's comment on if it's under arts and heritage, it becomes a heritage primarily. And I completely understand that. But based on the feedback from the Heritage Committee, there was also a question, what do you do if there's 3 or 4 in there? So the response I also made to Heritage was, even though Board of Selectmen are listed in there, and this is nothing against the Selectmen, but I would not expect the Selectmen to pick up one of the master plan implementation elements as a project for the Selectmen.
Right.
So each of the, if it's in a chapter, that the people that crafted the chapter and the people that created the goals and the strategies are, as Mike suggested, chief and in charge of that. But then if the implementation committee isn't going to be the liaison, which is what I suggested to Heritage, maybe the planning board needs to decide that the planner then become the liaison between all of the various facets within a particular strategy, to make sure that as Heritage goes into goal 1 or 1.1, that I also make EDC aware and the chamber aware and the Board of Selectmen aware. Now, some of the subcommittees have players from all the groups, but if there's an absence or something like that, someone has to be that nexus. So I would like the board to decide who do you want being that connectivity link, if you will. Who's reporting for who if somebody isn't there, basically.
Yeah, it seems.
Madam Chair,
Yeah, go ahead.
Mary DeVries here, speaking on behalf of the Chamber of Commerce.
Oh, okay.
Just so we took the approach as we looked at the implementation plan. Anywhere there's chamber, you will receive a response from us. So that's how we have approached it. And giving the example of 1.1, oh my gosh, that has been established and accomplished and ongoing for 30 years. So I'm not sure, we absolutely are available to be helpful in any way we can be, but just wanted to reiterate that we looked at it, we took it very seriously, and anywhere there's the word Chamber of Commerce, or I guess you've abbreviated chamber, we will respond to that. So that we felt was our responsibility to do so. Thank you.
Oh, okay, wouldn't the simplest thing be for these folks to meet with the Heritage and EDC and the Chamber? I mean, Vaughn, doesn't that seem like kind of a positive thing to do?
Absolutely. Because the perspective was that this isn't satisfactory the way it is now, and we have to figure out, somehow to make it more satisfactory for more people. And so all of the people involved, and specifically those listed here, should have some say and a voice. So yeah, some kind of a meeting, I think, is essential.
Right, yeah. And obviously, it's in the master plan and on the list for a reason, that it needs more discussion. That's what seems to me. Right?
Yes, yep.
Yeah,
Can the public speak again?
okay.
So that's interesting because from the Chamber of Commerce perspective, we were just put into responsible party. So we are a separate entity. We're not a town entity.
Right.
So, and there are other examples of that. So it's very interesting because we have our own bylaws and what have you. So we're trying, we absolutely will respond to each of where we're identified as a responsible party. But I'm just, about all additional meetings, I mean, I would imagine every single entity has their own charter, if you will. So I'm not sure how that's going to work.
I always sort of thought it was good to have a conversation among groups, but...
Well, we did during the master plan, all the different chapters, right?
No, Madam
Okay,
Chairman,
thank you.
I take Mary DeVries' point. It is somewhat peremptory to assign tasks to the chamber when they are not part of the town government, part of the planning board, and they're an independent agency with their own charter.
Right, I think we talked about that at the time also, but, yes, right. Well, we get, I understand your concern, Mary, but all I was suggesting is that it seems like a conversation would be a good thing to pursue. But let's, anything else on your three, Vaughn?
Not really, just so what I'm hearing is that the Heritage maybe reaches out to the EDC and the Chamber, and if they want to participate, you know, they could participate in this master plan goal and the establishment of some kind of a resolution.
Right, okay. Okay, well, I guess this issue the planning board needs to figure out how, if we're going to run into this again, how we're going to deal with it. Okay,
Well, to that end, if you look, I guess I need some clarification from the Heritage, because they selected their first three goals, but they include, you know, at least in goal 1, there's 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3. It's only under 1.1 that Heritage is a responsible party, but 1.2 is Board of Selectmen and EDC, and then 1.3 is Selectmen and Town Manager.
right.
What's the question?
Well,
Assigning responsibilities?
assigning responsibilities, I think in terms of chapter, not in terms of what the responsible party is, and that might be a way to address. I almost read the responsible party column in the spreadsheet to be people to consider as you go through this process with achieving your goal, as opposed to who is responsible.
Traditionally, it has been who has responsible.
Okay.
And periodically, at least in the past practice, if I may, Madam Chairman, past practice is periodically the planning board canvasses the responsible parties with a list of the tasks that they were responsible for, and asks them to please provide an update on how they're progressing with those responsibilities. And each department or agency will check off or write down working very hard or whatever it might happen to be. And then that comes back to the planning board. It's a way the planning board monitoring the progress of the goals established by the master plan.
I didn't represent myself well. If you look on the first page, under Arts and Heritage, is goal number 1. It's in a blue band with red font in it. That is what Heritage selected as their number 1 goal. But then if you look at the sub-goals, Heritage is only the responsible party in one of the responsible parties in 1.1.
Yep. That's also been standard.
Okay.
Planning board, back when I was on Conservation Commission, Planning Board assigned responsibilities to Concom, which did not include them in any role other than oversight.
Okay.
So maintaining Ryefield Marsh, one of our prime wetlands, Conservation Commission responsibility. Planning Board had no business doing that. Concom did, but Planning Board was interested in seeing how it was done because that was a master plan goal.
Okay, I'll rephrase. Who is the responsible party for goal 1.2?
According to what I'm looking at here, and I can't speak for Heritage, it's BOS and EDC.
So that's not Heritage then?
But it's a heritage goal.
Well, that's what I was asking.
Well, to add another layer of confusion to this, it is actually Arts and Heritage chapter. Correct. And the Heritage Commission were the people who I spoke with about setting goals and choosing the top 3. The arts people who were on the chapter committee are not represented in this ongoing conversation at this point. So we're a half of a chapter.
Okay, it sounds like this one, we need to figure out how to, and we don't need to do it tonight, but it sounds like it needs some, to figure how we want to proceed. So Vaughn, you're saying that this isn't necessarily the Heritage Commission, they didn't come up with all of these specifics. It was you're talking about the Master Plan Committee, right?
Correct, yeah, which included a bunch of people involved in the arts
Yeah, oh, okay.
who are
Okay,
not on the Heritage Committee.
all right. We've got to regroup on this one, figure out how to proceed. Mary, thanks for your input.
Well, Madam Chairman, to that end, I heard what I was looking for tonight in Mike's summary of how, each of these committees works on their goals and comes up with a report, and occasionally the planning board will canvass and see, we're working very hard, we've just gotten off the ground, we're starting to put our thoughts together, et cetera. That's the sort of feedback I was looking for. The next level would be, do you want I, as the planner, to set a schedule and do quarterly touchstones with these groups to say, how are you doing on your goals, 1, 2, and 3? And then say, I need your written response to this by this date for this planning board meeting, and then the planning board can just observe how things are proceeding?
It sounds like in this chapter that we're talking about, that we need to reconvene that committee. Do you think that's the way to go, Vaughn?
I think the Heritage group is uncomfortable speaking for the whole group.
Yeah, right, okay.
Canvas by email, Madam Chairman.
Yeah, excuse me?
One solution might be to simply canvass all the members of the Arts and Heritage Committee that worked on the master plan by email, if that's legal, because they're no longer a committee, they're just individual people, and see how they feel about the goals in order to save time, rather than reconstituting a committee which is not constituted at this point.
Okay, all right. So, and Canvas will get together and figure out the procedure. Why don't you go ahead? What's the next one is?
Community facilities.
Community facilities, okay. Okay. Mike, do you want to,
Well, this one was going to get revisited again after the email, correct?
Yeah, I'm not going to rehash what I already said. I will send an email to you
I-
and to Susan with the priorities that we had established back in October for the Community Facilities chapter, and take it from there.
I have the email with the 1 through 3 priorities. Do you want me to read them?
If you want to, sure.
Community Facilities Chapter, Principal Recommendations and Responsible Agencies, Recommendations for Existing Facilities. Establish, fund, and staff a town-wide maintenance department. Encourage construction of asset management plans for 100K plus assets. Encourage continued use of CRAs, those are capital reserve accounts, to amortize costly projects. Those are real meaty ones that we'd really
gosh, I
like.
did a pretty good job then. Those are the ones that I picked out for you.
Well, there's another batch that hasn't been gone over yet.
Okay.
I won't take much of the board's time. When the Community Facilities chapter looked at the community facilities, we looked at the existing ones and the ones we thought we needed. So we broke down our recommendations, 1 on existing facilities, and 2 things for the future. And then we assigned responsible parties to each, and then within each one of those categories, I came up with the group came up with 3 particular important goals. So we have 6 goals total in 2 major categories: existing facilities and facilities for the future.
Okay.
So you're close, Madam Chairman.
Yeah, okay, all right.
Pretty close without rewriting what was in the plan?
Pretty good.
Okay, so the next one is housing.
Next one I have is EDC. I believe housing needs to get addressed.
Okay, well, housing didn't get on the list, but basically there were 3 priorities, and actually we've already started working, or Mike has, on the affordable housing. And there were 2 for affordable housing. One was to relook at the affordable housing ordinances that we have, make sure that they're usable. Another was to add to the Central Business District, Wolfeboro Falls, and I think Bay Street, the ability to have more dwelling units. Those are in the greater downtown. We would need to take a look at the zoning ordinances and see if that was something we wanted to pursue. And then the third one was to review the conservation subdivision ordinance. No one seems to be using that. There must be a reason that they are not using it. So we wanted to take a look and make sure that that's still a realistic ordinance. So those were the 3 from the housing.
I'm going to actually suggest that that was one of the points which the Natural Resources Committee ended up also looking at. And so the planning board should look at that as a regulation.
Okay, and then the next one is economic development, TAVIS.
Correct.
Okay.
Again, they have already formed subcommittees and are working towards their ends. There is a more expanded view of this, but this is how they took their subcommittee organization and fit it back into the implementation matrix. And I can share that if the group is interested. Not now, but at a later date.
Okay. So that's in progress.
Yes. In fact, I believe they have, through Selectman Murray, have some information going to the selectmen tomorrow night to get something out prior to deliberative session, if that's possible, towards their own goals.
Toward the deliberative session?
It's
the dock. Oh, okay.
regarding the dock extension, which is
Yeah, okay, I see.
an item that is dear to their hearts.
Right. Okay. And the next one?
Next one is energy. This might be another one that requires some, I'll say, implementation committee work, because it is largely, other than the municipal electric, it is town manager, select board, and energy committee as responsible parties.
Right. I've talked to Susan Fuller, who's the chairman, and she feels that they do need some guidance. And so I offered you as their guidance.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'd be happy to.
Okay.
And we'll talk later about what
But they
that's gonna be.
did choose
You're in the
their,
big
they
chair
do
now.
have their 3 priorities.
Correct.
And so, but now they need to understand how to move ahead.
Correct.
Okay.
Next is future land use. And, well, first on the list is planning board for responsible parties. Planning board, Economic Development Committee, and Department of Public Works. That's at least in one of the sub-goals, 7.6. But in that is also, well, it's interesting. So here's the thematic argument. So there was discussion in housing about reviewing the conservation subdivision regulations. Here, under future land use, we have goal 1.1, review the existing conservation subdivision ordinance. And as Peter suggested earlier, under natural resources, there's discussion of revisiting the conservation subdivision ordinance. So similar to what we came up with arts and culture, we have 3 different groups already tasked with functionally the same thing. Eloquently,
Right.
it's all the same, literally the same project. And
Sounds like
there's planning board reference throughout each of those.
Sounds like a good point to make in your opening statement to the implementation matrix, the introductory comments to the implementation matrix. There are commonalities among the goals. Here is one of them.
Right.
Rather than thinking in terms of a supra committee on which members of 3 individual committees will sit to oversee, make it individual committee responsibilities or individual responsible parties' responsibilities, and just note that there's a common theme shared by 3 different chapters. Make it simple, in other words, not complicated.
Okay.
At natural resources.
Okay. Peter, do you want to comment on natural resources? Peter, after you turn your mic on, maybe?
The conservation issues that we end up having, subdivisions, that needs to be revisited. And in some ways, I look at the old regulation as something which puts an undue burden on the Conservation Commission, because in at least one subdivision, there are 3 separate little properties which are conserved properties, which are under the jurisdiction of Conservation Commission. And how do they end up dealing with this piece of property which is so small that it is basically useless? The idea that we'd like to deal with an easement to protect the entire watershed of the town water supply is a major thing which just needs to be brought to the select board. Not something which is going to be done tomorrow, but something which ultimately needs to be dealt with. I think that there's a recent property that's been purchased just to the west of our watershed that includes some of it that's helpful in that regard. But if we want to have clean water, we need to make sure that we are doing a good job protecting it. It is interesting when you look at the property that Wolfeboro owns associated with the water resource, that there is not a whole lot of waterfront that is still available to build on. And it's very interesting when you look at it. And the idea that we make a town-wide map system that shows usage is something which is probably easy to do. Conservation Commission apparently also is interested in having that done. And to me, there were a number of things that I think are reasonably high priority, but they're also much longer range. And maybe we need to start working on those. But at the same time, they're not things which are going to get done tomorrow.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to add something else, Tavis?
I don't on that, no.
It does seem like this subdivision regulation is something that we definitely need to get on, because it's been spoken about, I think, from 3 different directions.
Okay.
Next one that I have priorities for is transportation. In this particular one, the 3 that are picked are generally number 1 priority is working with the planning board to update the town's road standards. Combined with that is the second or orange goal to incorporate a complete streets concept. I don't want to scare people, and as I read complete streets, It's a completely thought-out street. It's not the traditional complete streets that happens to be in quote with curb gutter, sidewalk drainage, tree lawns, street trees, street lights, sidewalks, bike lanes, etc. It's any combination of those multiple elements that make a complete street within a development or between developments or areas of development. And then going to the third category here is adopt local road standards that encourage context sensitivity. So that's exactly that. Number 3 helps number 2, which furthers number 1, if you will. So all of those are combined, largely done out of my observations of the variety of roads, to use the term loosely, in Wolfeboro, whether it's a private road that's 8 feet wide serving 3 to 5 houses from way back when, or if it's 22 feet of asphalt that services 2 homes. There doesn't seem to be any nexus in construction standards, construction expectations, stormwater, environmental concerns, or transportation options. So that's how those 3 categories came to be in transportation. So, and then the last one that was on the list was infrastructure, and I don't have any information on infrastructure. And Susan said she didn't get any either. So I do want to apologize to the board at how this information came across tonight. I know Susan was waiting for some responses through Friday evening, if not Saturday, and I got it Sunday afternoon. So what you have in front of you is what I was able to do between 5:30 and now. So it's a start. If you have questions, I can share it in various forms so you can see what the goals are. I guess my final recommendation or next step on this is to get the implementation committee back together and say, now that we've gotten feedback from the board, now what? And then we'll pick a date to come back to the planning board with the next steps.
Right.
Unless the board wants something else.
Yeah, and we do need to figure out this responsible party issue and kind of forget, maybe we should forget about this and relook at it in a little bit more of a realistic way. Because it really is confusing, and I can see where the chamber might have gotten a different idea. I don't think there was anything that we were trying to put anything off onto anyone. It was just that these related to the chamber. We wanted to make sure that they were included, so.
Well, exactly, and going back to the
It's all in the messaging, I guess.
Yeah, the Heritage Commission meeting, there was some concern, well, if goal 1.1 is being addressed by Chamber and EDC and Heritage and the Selectmen, and we went in direction A, B, C, and D,
Right.
what then goes back to the planning board? They may each achieve it just as effectively as each other, and be in 4 different end zones, if you will. So, yes, I agree.
Okay, so we'll get back to the planning board. We'll figure out a more logical approach to this. But many of these items that have the planning board indicated will then go on to our work plan, which we'll be talking about in a month or so. So we're going to be getting back to you relatively quickly on this, and to the other organizations involved. Okay.
Well, can I end up saying something here?
Yes.
In that, I think in some ways, to me, I felt very restricted if there were only going to be 3 things that I ended up putting forward. And I then ended up thinking about what is something that can be done quickly, what is something that is long-term, and what is something that is medium-term. And so these, to me, it was sort of constricting how I ended up dealing with it. And I think that it may be useful if the, and it probably is going to require some work and some thinking, but the various chapters have these recommendations. And I think that they need to be fleshed out in a way to indicate which one needs to be, and we do have the high priority, medium, and low, But I think that somehow each of those needs to have a method to get to fruition. And so therefore, somehow that should be put forward as in, yes, there's the planning board or the select board or whatever, but I think that that needs to be fleshed out in a way to say that the planning board needs to adjust XYZ, or the select board needs to be dealing with XYZ in order to get there. Now that may be unrealistic. At the same time, I would be very more than happy to try to make a stab at all those things for what the Natural Resources chapter recommended. At the same time, I also look at it as, when I looked at the total number of recommendations from in the master plan recommendations, it was huge. And we need to end up having methods of how we're going to get there and suggestions as how we're going to do it.
Okay, I think we came up with the 3, just we didn't want to overburden people, so we came up with 3, I think. And certainly that can be rediscussed and doesn't have to be hard and fast, I wouldn't think.
Madam Chairman.
Right, but
sorry.
if I ended up if the Natural Resources group ended up making 30 recommendations or 45 or whatever the number was, and now 3 have to be picked, that ends up being rather restrictive. And I think that really there needs to be a way to go from recommendation to fruition. Outlined, and I think that can be done, but it ends up then putting some burden on the people who are writing the various chapters.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Go ahead, Mike.
Madam Chairman, I would like to echo what Peter had to say. I felt, and I'm pretty sure John did and Julie did, somewhat, I won't speak for you, but I'll speak for myself, constrained by the necessity of coming up with the 3 top priorities on the list. Speaking only for the Community Facilities chapter, we met very frequently and we had field trips very frequently. We put a lot of work into all of the recommendations. We thought each one of them was important enough to list. I didn't really like the idea of having to knock them down to only 3.
Okay.
In the past with master plans, each chapter's recommendation wound up in an implementation matrix, and each one of them was looked at almost as if it were as important as every other one. They may have been listed 1 through 10, but at least all 10 were listed. I would not be opposed to having all recommendations from each chapter listed into the implementation matrix, since we all spent time coming up with each one of them. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I think they all are, and all the goals are in the implementation plan.
Okay, well then what is this document that we've been working on all about?
Well, this is the 3 that we asked people to come up with to get started.
Yeah, it was just a way to get started. I mean, we're obviously going to focus on all of them.
Okay,
That's all.
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, I think you got to get a blueprint on a small scale for getting started, so that you can figure out what the routine's going to be for the rest of the items. And really, I think what it comes down to here is, what can we do today? How much it's going to cost tomorrow? And how much planning do we have to do after that?
Right.
And I think that was, to Peter's point, I think he was struggling with, okay, so for my 3, do I pick one that's easy and quick, or do I pick one that I really feel is the most important that perhaps could take a lot longer? I think that's what was challenging for Peter, judging from the email.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Pardon?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And
So that I understand.
It may be that what we need to do is, make a list of things which we think we can do easily in a year's time frame, and then some things which we need to do over a longer period of time.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
One of the comments that I brought up at the Master Plan Implementation Committee meeting, where the idea of coming up with 3 came from, you know, not to change the current plan, but looking at the next iteration of the master plan that might be helpful for groups when coming up with goals, to come up with a priority and then a level of difficulty. So it might be that the high priority, high level of difficulty is Peter's, if you will, longer range, more expensive, more involved plan. And then the question is, okay, well, what can we reasonably do? Each committee has X amount of dollars every year, and maybe some portion of, I'll say, bonded monies for gross use of phrase. But, you know, there might be a kitty of 319 projects that could be used for A, B, and C projects. But having an ability, the idea between 1, 2, and 3 was, I suppose it could be read at first, well, which 3 need to be addressed now? Which of these rise to your level? Which 3 are absolute right now items, whether that's long-term, short-term, or otherwise? And back to Peter's point, if you were to say, well, look, we only get 3, let's pick 3 easy ones and let's do the next one, I would challenge each group to say, great, rank in priority all of the goals in the master plan, and then schedule it out, as John said, with a blueprint. We've got 5 to 10 years with this plan. Here's our schedule. And then we follow up. So it was interesting. I mean, it wasn't intended to be a trick question, but the idea was, how are people going to respond? Is it quick and simple, or is it long and hard? Which ones are going to rise to the surface? Because then the board can finagle its work around that. So.
I'm not going to speak for the Board of Selectmen, but I think when things come down the line as a individual, you put wants behind needs. And I think Peter made good comment about the watershed. That's a need. So that's I mean, sorry, but the wants are behind that need. And I think that could be a discussion also in rating.
Well, and what we're seeing is in a lot of these chapters, there's a lot about water quality. And so I think we need to take that into account and figure out a slightly different approach here. Okay, all right, thanks, folks. The next item is a discussion of section 175-145, and that's the multifamily ordinance in our zoning ordinance. Tavis had come across this section, felt that it needed some work, and so we asked him to take a look at it and make some suggestions. And you want to go ahead,
Sure.
Tavis, please?
In the zoning ordinance is Article 23, entitled Multifamily Dwellings. I did put it up on the screen for those that are interested in looking at it. 143 is applicability of regulations. 144, so the title of the article is multifamily dwellings. So 175, 143 talks about the applicability of other regulations. 175, 144 speaks to, if you will, multifamily requirements for village residential, and general residential, and all commercial districts except CBD and WF districts, so the waterfront district. Question mark, and I'll get back to the question mark in a minute. And then section 175, 145 is requirements for CBD and WF districts. So in the memo that I sent out to each of you, and it was in the packets, the short statement here is that 143 through 145 have been superseded by all of the other zoning amendments, primarily by the fact that the CBD doesn't exist as the CBD anymore. It's actually the C1 CBD. The WF doesn't exist anymore. It's the WF CBD. So the titles have changed, the districts have changed. And where this particularly caught my eye is in 175, 145D, it talks about conversions of existing dwellings. And where you get conversions of existing dwellings, that section actually conflicts with the actual zoning sections for the base zoning districts. So it says you can go from 1 to 4, but in the zoning it allows you to go to 6. So you would argue that the more restrictive applies, but yet the more restrictive hasn't been updated since 2014, but others were adopted after that. So I think what happened, for lack of a better phrase, is people lost sight of this entire section. I think all of the protections, regulations, and requirements that were intended by this section have been superseded by the base zoning districts. And my recommendation, quite simply, would be that in the next town meeting cycle, we look at removing this section of the ordinance. Question mark. Does the planning board see any value or see something I'm not seeing as to why this section is a critical piece of the zoning regulations?
Well, it must have been put into the zoning ordinance for a particular reason. And it wasn't put in 2011. It was in prior to that, and I don't know.
Oh, no, it hasn't been updated since 11, but the other section, the other zoning districts have.
The only update in 11 was adding the 5 dwelling units.
Correct.
But I don't know, we're supposed to be trying to create more housing opportunities, and I tried to compare the two, and I'm just concerned that we're taking away housing opportunities. And our master plan...
The base zoning districts, certain base zoning districts already allow multifamily dwellings. And within those is also, I came up with a map going through each of the districts and showing you where they cross-reference each other, but it basically ends up in a circular reference. So what happens in this particular section, if you look at converting a dwelling to put in multifamily dwellings in the CBD or WF districts, the way it's written, all you actually have to look at is parking. A and B go away. That's what the bottom of D says. Requirements for multifamily units is required in this section, with the exception of parking requirements under subsection C shall not apply. So you already lose control over number of units and density, which is stated differently in the other zoning sections.
Okay, well, I think it needs a lot more work before we decide to throw it out with the trash.
Okay, here's one more piece. There's nothing in the base zoning districts or under special exceptions or site plan regulations or other that actually point someone to look at this when applying this regulation.
Yes, there is. I found a couple references.
Okay.
I think it was in Wolfeboro Falls and someplace else, but it does talk about a multifamily. So, but that's not a reason to get rid of a whole section of the zoning ordinance just because it needs to be updated.
Well, that's the question. I mean, the easy thing to do is to remove it because I believe it's already covered in the base zoning regulations. The other thing to do is go back and chapter and verse cross-reference everything, update the titles in this correctly, make sure the density works out in each of the sections. And my question to the board is it worth going through that effort to do something that's already in the base zoning regulations?
Okay, well, again, I think it needs more work. There's no surprise to anybody that I'm a housing advocate, but our master plan very clearly says that we need more and different types of housing opportunities in this town. And it talks about increasing the density in the central business district and things of that nature. So again, I think this needs...
I'm happy to go back and do a full cross-reference if that's what the board would like.
Maybe I'm the only one that feels that way, but I know that we do have it in our master plan, so other people must have some concerns about it.
Well, Kathy, one of the things I'd suggest is that Tavis, I think, has done a very good job of analysis. At the same time, he ends up bringing something to us where it's sort of out of left field. And I think that we need time to digest it.
Right.
We will follow exactly with what he suggests. At the same time, it may end up being that we need to make modifications or change some of the other regulations so that this one can be removed. But I think that this is something that we need to look at. I don't think it's something we need to deal with today. At the same time, I think it's his points are, to me, very valid based on the fact that it is dealing with stuff which really areas or zoning areas which are non-existent. So we need to look
But they're
at it.
just letters. They just need to be changed. CBD needs to change to C1. Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I did that cross-referencing task that Tavis suggested needed to be done, and my conclusion is that we need to retain 143 through 145 because it provides opportunities for multifamily housing in districts where it is not currently allowed under our current zoning. For example, in the, the residential district, I don't find multifamily as a permitted use or as a special exception use, whereas 175-143's applicability says that these requirements supersede all other town regulations. So in that case, 175-143 would allow multifamily housing in the residential district where the residential district zoning does not allow it. The same thing occurs in the GR district. In the VR district, multifamily housing is allowed, but only with water and sewer. Here, water and sewer is not required for multifamily. Density drops, but water and sewer hookups are not required for multifamily housing. So in this case, in the VR district, you could have multifamily housing on a septic system if such a thing existed, whereas you couldn't in current zoning. In the central business district, such as it was called, multifamily housing is allowed with no restriction on how many units. And here there's more restriction limited to 6 units. So there, if we want to fiddle with it, we can decide whether we want denser or not denser. But getting rid of 175, 143 through 145 eliminates that flexibility. In the Wolfeboro Falls, the WF district, multifamily is not permitted. This ordinance would allow multifamily in the WF district by preemption. It seems to me that the simplest solution would be simply to rename the district names that are incorrect in 175, 144, go through and do a much closer cross-reference than I've done to be sure that there are no traps by doing the cross-referencing, and then recraft 175, 143 through 145 at next year's warrant, accommodating the changes that we need to make. And I offer that with a certain degree of trepidation.
Yeah, that, I can finish my cross-referencing. I just didn't have time. Go ahead, Tavis.
If multifamily is something the board wants to encourage in the VR, in the R, and other places, why is it not listed as a permitted use, even if it were under the guise of conversion of single family to 4 units? I ask that because if there were 3 or more units in a building, it would have to be fire sprinkled, because once you have 3 units, it becomes a commercial structure. So I think it would involve, I mean, I'm not looking for, obviously not looking for a vote or clear direction tonight. This is something for the board to think about as you go into the next steps. What makes VR VR if you can convert any single family home to 4 units? I also have questions about everything in the R district requires water sewer hookup. That's just given. So if you're allowing a single family, if you're requiring a single family to connect to water, it's already connected to water, ostensibly, if it were done per regulation. you would then allow it to go to 4 units without the water connection. Would they be able to forego the existing, or would you be serving 1 out of 4 with the water connection, and the other 3 would have their own well and septic? And my question is, how is the town benefiting by that type of allowance? I'm not debating that the master plan encourages multifamily housing and housing opportunities, and I'll bend over backward to help the town do that. But to me, having a separate section that says, oh, look over here, you don't have to pay attention to what I look as the character of the single-family village residential feel, and you're now allowing multifamily in there, particularly with some of the broad brush tolerances of 175/45 and not requiring water and not doing this and not doing that. I think it's, to me, it's very different from a community that's already made the choice to require ADUs to get a conditional use permit in an attached paradigm. Does that make sense? Essentially, you could use 175, 145 to put an accessory dwelling unit without a conditional use permit if you want to follow that logic through.
Right. I think we probably need to go zone by zone and decide what we mean.
Right.
You know, if we want multifamily housing, then let's figure that out, but it does seem very conflicted right now.
Well, it's only conflicted in that the preemption allowed in 175, 143 has not really been appreciated in this current debate.
And if it's
Go ahead,
if
sorry.
it's suddenly realized, that means we have a lot of single-family houses out there whose neighbor could throw in a 4-family unit right next to them. I think they'd be pretty surprised.
That may well be the case. This has been on the books since at least 2011. I think it's clear. I mean, Tavis makes a good point. One set, the multifamily dwellings article, Article 23, has implications for the rest of the zoning in town which have not been appreciated. I think it would, personally, would be rash to throw it out at next warrant go-around just because there appear to be some irritations, so to speak, between Article 23 and the rest of the zoning ordinances that we have that concern zoning. I think that we are interested as a board in promoting multifamily housing. I think we're going to have to be if we want to maintain a viable community. There are allowances in Article 23 which are valuable. I don't think it would be safe to throw it out. I think if we're going to make changes to accommodate multifamily in some fashion, the simplest solution would be to rewrite Article 23 so that it doesn't create irritations in other districts, rather than rewrite the zoning for each district to accommodate multifamily in some irritatingly less way. Certainly at warrant time, we'll have one article to read to address as opposed to, say, 25.
Okay, so did you want to say something, Peter?
Yes, and I think that trying to make decisions this evening about this is basically not going to go anywhere. And I think that this is something, because it's not going to be on this warrant that's just coming up, we have plenty of time to deal with it. We need to find out all the particulars and then make some decision. And I think just we should move on to the next topic.
Madam Chairman, if I may, just one last comment?
Yes.
Before we move on to the next topic. We are going to be addressing inclusionary housing, multifamily housing, housing for the aged, housing for workforce, et cetera, at some stage in our work program this year. Let's put Article 23 onto that work program, because clearly it's an important tool, and work it in to the overall program.
Okay.
That sounds very good.
Okay, so we will revisit, but thank you, folks. Okay, the next one is the Boathouse Regulation. The last time we had that we approved a boathouse, there were some issues that came up About do you remember them, John? The fellow that presented it said that we were not consistent with the state RSA. Do you remember any of that? But anyway, so I asked Havis if he could take a look, see if there's anything with our boathouse ordinance, which is 17565, to see if there are any changes that we should consider.
To that end, I looked through the boathouse section of the town regulations and went through the state regulations, and I can't find anything that references your opening sentence on the topic. I also went further to see if there were any pending bills, one way or the other, and I can't see any proposed changes that we need to be gearing up for. But to close this topic, at least for what I know, I will continue to watch that and keep the board advised if something changes that is going to be a topic the board might want to consider.
I actually do recall that meeting, and I believe that the presenter stated that the square footage allowed has been dropped by the DES, and something about the overhang is not counted.
Correct.
And that's only what he said. I don't know the regulation myself, but I presume he would know.
Right, yes, it was about the overhangs, because I had written it down, but I wasn't sure exactly. I think he was not including the overhangs in the size of the...
Yeah, the question, as I remember, I agree with Vaughn and with Kathy, it was regarding the overhang on the boathouse. Boathouse footprint was 900 feet, and there was an overhang, or with the overhang, it came into just under, I think, 890-something odd square feet. And the question was, do the overhangs count as part of the footprint of the boathouse? And that was the issue. In our ordinance, we say 900 square foot footprint. And the question was, does that mean including the overhang, or does he get the footprint on the ground, and then if it's another 10 feet or on either side of overhang, is that not included in the 10 foot? Does he get it?
Well,
And as I recall Matt saying, actually, he didn't see where the overhang was counted at all. The footprint was one thing, and the overhang was something else. That's what he said at that meeting. So I think there's some review here that's needed.
Well, I will dig into it now that I know I'm looking specifically for overhangs. I can see where the zoning board, I agree, different group, the zoning board has granted variances or special exceptions and specified foundation or overhang. I will tell you, for the purpose of setbacks, it's to the overhang.
Right.
When the question of if you want a 900 square foot boathouse and you have 10-foot overhangs, that is exactly the type of person that forces there to be a regulation that says no overhangs count. In the purest sense, I believe it was the foundation at 900, and people have 18 to 20, 24-inch overhangs depending on their architectural preference. But you still have to meet the setbacks. You're still dealing with the pervious surface or impervious surface, and all of that comes into play.
So you don't see a problem here?
No,
Agreed. I tended to,
I don't, but I will address overhangs and come back to you.
yeah,
So you
I
don't-
tended to feel the
You
same
don't
way.
think you should look into the size?
I will verify whether the statute speaks to 900 to overhang or 900 without overhang,
Yeah,
and report
okay,
back.
and that there's no contradiction in our zoning ordinance?
Yes.
Yeah, okay,
There are bigger things to spend time on than this one, but I will report back to you.
yeah,
That's
okay.
my opinion.
Okay, well, it had come up, and I just
I have a
figured
point.
before it came up again,
Yeah.
that we should look at it.
So if we take a look and practically at the boathouse, the old style boathouse was a galley up the middle and an overhang about 9 or 10 feet so that somebody could skirt another boat up on the outside with not building structure in the water. The only part of the overhang that I think we should count would be on the front side, which would be on the land side. And
Yeah,
Oh, so you'd have a covered slip and then 2 boat ports, if you will.
yes,
Okay. That makes-
that's the old style. That's the way it was.
There are new DES water rules rules adopted last month. They were effective last year, effective in December of 19, which allow for a larger boathouse than we do based on a 150-foot frontage requirement, but we're allowed to have more restrictive sizing than DES allows.
And I would agree with the more, I'm sorry, but I'm going to agree with the more restrictive, because what you get around here is you get bigger boathouses. People down the waterway lose their views of the natural character of the lake. And when you build this monster, it's taken away from other people.
Okay, all right, so we will revisit this. And now we're gonna go on to stormwater regulations. This is something that that we kind of started when Matt was still here. But we didn't get too far. So we asked Tavis to take a look. What Matt told us was that some parts of the existing stormwater regulations are really unworkable. And since stormwater regulations are really important, we want to take a look at them, make sure that they're effective, and the people are using, the developers are using them correctly. So go ahead, Tavis.
Sure. So what I did is put together a brief introductory memo. In short, what it says is see attached. And one of the ideas, this is not, John had sent me an email saying, well, what's the old and what's the new? All of this is new and proposed. So this is a new way of looking at stormwater regulations. And the ways this could be done, this is all based on, the New Hampshire Stormwater Management Model, Volume 2. It gives someone a metric to design to. Areas of obvious flexibility show up under minimum thresholds for applicability. And here I have it at an acre of disturbance or less than 20 square feet or less than 20,000 square feet of impervious surface. Those are thresholds in site plan review for doing increased stormwater management practices. The board could change that to half an acre and 15 square feet if you wanted. You just have to think of when you're triggering functionally site plan review. What the memo also speaks to is that this could be adopted, or a version of this could be adopted into site plan and subdivision at first blush, and then the board could take the temperature of the town, if you will. It could be put into the zoning regulations and thereby be applicable to single-family homes. I know that can be a third rail, but you can come up with different rules for single-family. All new single-family homes have to include a rain garden. All new single-family residential have to show no net increase in runoff rate, quantity, or flow, and how they're treating it. What I tried to take out of this model for a large part is the parts that become difficult. You have to remove your total suspended solids by 90% over the exigent condition, and you have to get 90% of your nitrogen to infiltrate before discharging to waters of the state. And what that becomes is a lot of number crunching. And I've spoken with the New Hampshire Stormwater Center, and they agree this is a broad stroke way to cover yourself. All of this paperwork basically says infiltrate your stormwater before it goes into waters of the state. So that would be anything on the topo quad or the lakes, obviously. Encouraging discharge into a wetland if you have the option. Treat it, put it into a wetland, and then let it go into a water course as opposed to just draining to a town ditch that goes into the creek, if you will. So there's a lot of language in here. There's a series of storm criteria that developers would have to meet. This is not hard for them to meet, and these are all numbers they're used to meeting at the state level. You could ratchet these up to be more restrictive than the state, but that puts more pressure on third-party engineers reviewing the plans to make sure you're crossing that threshold. I didn't expect any action on this tonight. I was hoping to get it out to people so you could review it. You could look at the existing stormwater regs and say, well, this seems much more approachable. I will say a number of communities in New Hampshire are using a version of this, not just Seacoast area where I'm from, but this is also getting a lot of support in the Manchester area. Obviously much more urban and impervious areas, but this is how they're addressing their local concerns with stormwater controls.
Go ahead, Mike.
Madam Chairman, can I suggest that a planning board subcommittee be commissioned to study the issue of stormwater regulations revision with Tavis? I looked at this and got about 3 pages in before my brain went dead. So I don't think I'm going to be on that committee, but I think we need to have somebody who's smarter than I am to look at this, because, and then come back to the planning board with recommendations, you know, people that I can, whose understanding I can trust. Thank you.
I won't take that personally.
I wonder if
pulling
we
your
can
leg.
have an outline of those portions of our current ordinance that are not working.
Okay.
You know, just a highlighted version saying that this is not workable, or in practice, this is what happens, just so that we can understand what we're changing and why.
And I think that Kathy makes the comment about we need housing, and when we do housing and single family, we don't want to add to the cost and the burden, but when somebody has to hire the guy to do all the specialty stuff, it's 10 grand.
Yep.
Right off the bat. So 10 grand right off the bat is 10 grand of a septic system or something else that they can afford so they can actually get a house. So I think we need to be really walking softly here to say, what's our best bang for the buck when it comes to the stormwater management?
Right.
Well, I'd suggest that if there's a committee put forward, John, that would be something that we would, that the committee would obviously look at, and I think that's an important point. So I think that's great. One of the things in this particular plan, which I think is exceedingly important, is Part G, which talks about post-construction stormwater infrastructure inspection and responsibility. And it talks about municipal staff and their designated agent shall have site access for routine inspections. And this is one of the things which I think we need to deal with, because if somebody builds something and says they're going to build it, it can be degraded in 5 or 10 years, and therefore it doesn't have anything. So that to me is one of the really important parts of this particular proposal. At the same time, I think that Ron has the point where, you know, what problems are we missing, what things aren't working right, so that if a committee gets formed, they can look at those particular issues.
Okay, and thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Tavis.
One more piece here. Toward the end of the memo, I did mention that I've given a copy of this draft language to Dave Ford, just so he can understand where the planning board might be thinking of going. And at the same time, I planted in his mind a sort of a side project, if you will, that of course I'll share with the subcommittee if it gets generated. But going back to the transportation implementation matrix, one of the things that the town is struggling with, and I understand Dave Ford and Matt had worked on it, and it sort of gained speed at various points but never went anywhere, was a road construction dynamic, or a cross-section, if you will. What are the standards and how does it work? One of the key pieces of this that I'd like to work on also is how to, a private road standard. How are those ditches managed? How is that stormwater managed? How does that system then discharge into a town system? I think my first select board meeting, there was discussion of, well, A, B, and C subdivisions were built way back when, and they're all draining to this road, and now the town is putting money into this giant fix. So one of the things to do, so I'm going to pick up John's point, I'm not suggesting that this needs to be implemented on single-family homes right off the bat, because he's right, adding another $10,000 for something that they may or may not be contributing to is not necessarily the first goal. But as subdivisions are coming in, the planning board would have the ability to say, how are you dealing with the stormwater runoff on this proposed private road that you're coming in with? And then how does that connect with the larger drainage system in the area, or sub-watershed, however you'd like to look at it? And to Peter's point, one of the ways people address, that I've most often seen people use to address G, is when you have a private road, you require them to have an association. I know typically around here, someone says, I agree to rake it and plow it, and what else do you do on your road? But the association agrees with how they're going to maintain their private road. One of those elements could be putting together, I'll say, an annual report, which is a very expensive or a very fluffy way of saying, I looked at it, the pipe is clear, the water's still discharging, you know, we've managed the vegetation as best we can, and that gets submitted. That's the way the town doesn't have to, I'm not looking for the town to need someone to be a BMP inspector. We're not there yet, but if the individual agencies are responsible for maintaining it, the planning board required it, they put it in, they should, you know, have an annual report. If they want to have a third party do that, that's up to the association. Some of them are very simple. You know, we told the landscaper when he mows the common area to mow the lawn, to spray the lawn clippings out of the rain garden. We had them do this. We make sure the pipe's clean, and he verified he did it, and we're certifying that he did. That way we have a check and balance at least annually on these projects. And if the planning board gets a project and it looks as though it's going to be uniquely heavy in its stormwater requirements, the planning board can put a condition in that be inspected after every 10-year event. That becomes a bit arduous. I already saw John's eyes go up because it does get expensive. It does get expensive at a point, but depending on what you're trying to control, you have the ability to put controls in place with your approvals to make sure people are putting stormwater at the forefront as much as they are their profit margin and number of units. And none of these systems have proven to be cost limiting for projects. The planning board, and I would be perfectly happy to help guide the planning board as to how many BMPs go into a project. You know, you're not putting a multi-million-dollar stormwater system in for a 3-lot subdivision, but you're not just putting in a 3-lot subdivision. Everything has to be proportional to the project.
So I think the weakest link in this whole process is, you know, you can regulate the multifamily and the large development project. It's what happens afterwards. Somebody moves in from another state, they resculpt their yard, they push all the water and dump it into the neighbor's yard. They resculpt their driveway and push their driveway down into the road, and it washes all the gravel down the road. You can't go to the people and say, look, you've just caused more damage. Or the person who moved here from another place and they just dumped 5 yards of beach sand in the drainage swale. And somebody now goes and picks it out, now you have a beef with a neighbor. Okay, who's going to be the one that's going to wrestle this and stand up for the private road when the town doesn't have any jurisdiction at all on a private road? And mandating that is a whole nother can of worms.
Right.
But that seems to me be the biggest problem right now, is manipulation of properties into roads with careless disregard about the water, because really, a lot of them don't know and they really don't care. They just want their yard and they want their nice driveway, and they just turn a blind eye and just do it. I think what we should start on is thinking about how we can enact small-scale oversight when it comes to the main causeway of a road and that subdivision, and try to manage it that way to start, because later on it's all going to change. They're all going to do what they want to do.
Well, I'm going to suggest that that is the reason why there needs to be follow-up. If somebody says they're going to do something, they need to do it. I would suggest that most of the properties that are out there right now have been grandfathered in. And so, you know, there's no way you can enforce that. But if there is a general enforcement associated with a regulation, then you can go and look at it in the same way that, you know, I think that there's, you know, the issue with Brewster Academy, which you were talking about back a few months ago, where, you know, you're worried about things getting into the lake, and that is a very real concern and something that we should be concerned about. But okay, they're saying they're going to do this. Do we just ignore them 10 years from now when they're not doing it? And the answer is no, we should not. And so therefore, there needs to be some oversight and looking at how things are really working.
There's one other issue here that I see more and more is you have houses that are older, they get a new septic system design, and a lot of these new designs are 4 feet high, and we're talking about areas near the lake, and when you create these high humps, now you have a depression on the side of that which congregates water, and that water just dumps right in the lake. Because you've created a high septic field to get rid of the effluent, but at the same time you've condensed water to smaller areas by creating a hump. And then it runs out of the driveway, runs across the other neighbor, he does the same thing. Now you have this galley just pouring water where you don't know what it's going to do, if it's going to get screened, it's going to go through grass, or it's just going to go right in. Septic system blight is a big problem as far as I'm concerned.
Madam Chair, just have a couple comments on this, if I could. One of the biggest issues I see here is with, you know, under G, under the inspection responsibility portion of this. You know, that first sentence there, it talks about municipal staff or the designated agent. You know, I think, you know, Tavis and Steve probably have enough going on now that they're not going to have the time to go out there and inspect all of these BMPs that we've approved, you know, over the years here. Because you got to think too, these aren't just roads we're talking about. We're talking about all these individual commercial sites have BMPs in them. And if we get one of those, you know, 50-year storms, you know, you're gonna have to go out. Technically, you should go out and check all of them, make sure they're working, or, you know, or these people are on an annual basis are keeping up with their reports and stuff. And then also in the office, you know, staff there for Tavis there, if we do require these reports to come in on an annual basis, there's going to be somebody on staff there that's going to collate all those, keep them, you know, the records there, and see which ones didn't report in. So if you have to go out and look at them or chase these people down, I think there's just going to be a tremendous amount of workload being put on the town and responsibility of the town for this. And I remember bringing this up a few years ago with Matt and talking about this is going to be the hardest part is going to be regulating these things or inspecting these things once they're installed and the people move on with their lives and everything's good there and stuff. And, you know, how are we going to make sure that these are maintained in operating conditions? So I think this really needs to be looked at and figured out how we're going to do it, whether we put the financial responsibility on the owner, developer, or whatever it is there through a designated agent. But then, you know, that gets into the cost that John was talking about too of these projects. So it definitely needs to be looked at, and that's where I see one of the largest issues here in dealing with these. And I think you're really going to be amazed if you sit down and look at all of the ones that just since I've been on the board here for what 7 or 8 years now that have gone through the board here and been approved. I think you'd be amazed at how long that list will be of how many of those are out there that need to be monitored. So.
Right, we did put all the maintenance responsibility really ended up on the town because reports had to be submitted, and apparently that's what never happened. But we spent a lot of time when we adopted these regulations you know, we were concerned about that maintenance aspect, and so we have all this 1, 2, 3, 4. This is what you have to do, and apparently it didn't get done. But I agree, Brad. So when Matt took a look at these, he took that out of the ordinance. Well, I'm not sure that was helpful, but.
I remember the day when Rob was here and there was something built, and you asked who's going to do it, and Rob said, "I'll do it," and that was it.
Yep. Madam Chairman, if I may, the concerns that Brad raised and John has raised are the sorts of things that perhaps the subcommittee could thrash out when it was crafting revised stormwater management
Yes,
regulations.
but it's good to have a discussion.
Yeah.
Yes, that's what we are. Tavis, can I just ask a question? Do we have sediment and erosion controls as a regulation or a requirement? Is that
In shoreland, yes. There are requirements around wetlands and things as well.
Well, I know the wetlands, right. But that's it?
Pretty much.
That's
Well,
probably,
I mean, with commercial, it's usually whatever design, I'll say, to simplify it, whatever the planning board approved as their erosion control plan as part of their site plan comes into play. But most of what's going on in Wolfeboro right now is single-family development. So unless there's a wetland or shoreland regs, you know, it falls back to the state where you're not allowed to cause water to go onto somebody else's property. And you're not obviously allowed to put your excavation materials on somebody else's property. But there's nothing requiring you to put a silt fence along Kathy's property because you're digging next to it.
okay. All right, well, let me we're going to have to figure out the next step with this and report back.
Peter?
Yeah,
Can I add something here?
yes,
Brad, I appreciate you as a member of the select board and therefore someone who is associated with keeping our town fiscally responsible. And so therefore I'm sympathetic to your saying, how are we going to pay for this? At the same time, I'm going to suggest that there were a number of things in the master plan which are talking about how we end up protecting our water resources. And so therefore, this is something that we may end up having as a town to say, it is worth having somebody who is going to protect that. There's also been some past discussion about how the various town projects which are doing best management practices to protect water going into our lakes need to be governed and looked at by somebody. And so it may end up being that ultimately we're going to need to have somebody who is literally dedicated to enforcement of regulation and overseeing things, overseeing projects. And so, you know, it is something which, you know, it's obviously is a cost, and the select board has to figure out how to deal with that, and the town has to figure out how to deal with that. But the water is very, very important to our town, so we need to be paying attention.
right, and the selectmen did appoint the Wolfeboro Waters Committee. It's actually the Wolfeboro Waters Committee that asked for us to look at this. So that's, I mean, they're a committee that we're supposed to be looking at stormwater runoff and things of that nature, so.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think the point I was kind of aiming at, didn't really come out and say it, is that it's going to appear to me that we're going to need to probably add staff. I think the point I was getting at with Tavis and Steve was that, I mean, they're very busy now and stuff, and to add, you know, more inspections onto this, in my opinion, I think we're talking about adding another, whether it's part-time or whatever, I think we're talking about, you know, staffing up a little bit more to be able to handle this type of thing. So I completely agree, it's very important, and our waters are, you know, the heartbeat of the town of Wolfeboro, so I have no question about that at all.
2 points, Madam Chairman. First, in our Wetlands Conservation Overlay District, the Planning Board does have responsibility for ensuring that any permits, any development going on there does not cause an additional erosion and siltation. So there is some protection in our ordinance,
Yes,
is correct.
right.
And to Brad's point, the first thing I thought of was salary and benefits, 80K times 10 years is 800,000. We're looking at $1 million for a person to do inspections of permitting. It's a lot of money. It's an important point, but it's a lot of money.
Go ahead, Tavis.
Just going to say that there are a large number of communities that were recently impacted by the implement of MS4 in the state of New Hampshire. And MS4 is functionally these regulations on steroids. There's a lot of stuff that comes out of the MS4 model, i.e. what EPA is putting in the requirements for the Clean Water Act that are taken out of this. Many of the smaller communities that applied these regulations or versions of these regulations with a higher level of standard did not incur, at least in the last 5 years, additional staff. I understand the point and the concern that eventually everyone's going to be overworked and this is going to turn into some million dollar a year employee when you look at all the costs. The intent of this being worded the way it is it puts the onus of this enforcement on the property owner. So regardless of who owns it, you bought a project, this is how it was approved and you're supposed to do it. The annual reporting, it's not so much, it's not intended, or it hasn't been employed, through my experience, that after every half-inch of rainfall, someone has to go out and make sure that these are operating correctly. It's not a DOT construction project where the site engineer has to be on site and do a stormwater observation agreement after every rainfall event. This is to make sure the system is working. A double check is the annual reporting. It may or may not be required. It may simply be that somebody say, you know, once there are plans and the plans are installed, people have an idea of what's going on. A neighbor to said project comes in for site plan review and the planning board is well aware that these map BMPs are next door. What do you put in for extra construction protocols during construction to make sure you're not negatively impacting these DMPs, and how do your proposed BMPs interact or not interact with those to serve the greater good? I think Wolfeboro, you know, I'd always love to manage more employees, but I think Wolfeboro is a long ways away from needing to consider extra staff to help implement this. And again, it wasn't intended to be drafted to say, look, we need more people.
Right.
Or I wouldn't have brought it in, quite frankly.
Right, actually, the existing regulation probably requires more people, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you. Okay, to be continued.
Do you want recommendations for a subcommittee at a future meeting, or do you want to go into creating a subcommittee? Or do you want to think about it longer?
Yes, well, let me show you some of the information. I realize that I hadn't shared everything with you, you know.
Okay.
That has happened thus far, so I need to do that first. So
Okay.
You can figure out how what we have so far fits in with what you're proposing.
Yep.
Okay.
So we're not going to do anything at this point?
No, we're going to.
We're not going to appoint a subcommittee tonight?
Not right
Okay.
now. Let me, I think we need to exchange a little more information. I've tried not to throw everything at him in one big ball. Okay. Next item on the agenda is a discussion of the rules of procedure update. So Mike agreed to take on this task. Our rules of procedure, we've adopted them or updated them several times, but why don't you, Tavis, do you want to say something before Mike gets going, or?
I don't have any concerns with the proposed changes.
Okay, all right. Okay, go ahead, Mike.
All right, and the suggestions are self-explanatory. They're in the margins in purple boxes. The only ones that are really substantive, I mean, a few of them are grace notes. Some of them are my particular choices of language, but the only one that is really substantive and that you need to be careful with is applications and decisions. Number 2, public notice, paragraph A. 2020, the legislature changed public notice requirements to allow the use of the town's internet website as well as a paper of general circulation. What that means is we can put notices into the Granite State and pay $2.50, I think it is, per time, or we can put a notice on the town's website and elsewhere as well in 2 other places and satisfy statutory requirements for notice. That's the only change. I've put it into the rules of procedure to allow the planning board that flexibility. It's provided by the state statute. We're not doing anything unusual. We're just giving ourselves the flexibility. It doesn't mean we have to change what we're doing now. It just means we can if we want to. And that's it. Basically, all of the other changes that are here either update dates on statutes or add additional statutory provisions that were not included because these rules of procedure are a little old in places. So I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have any. Otherwise, Madam Chairman, we could use this as a first reading.
Okay.
I have a question or a comment in that the publication of our meetings in the Granite State is obviously a reasonably large publication. It goes to a lot of people. At the same time, I wonder what percentage of the Wolfeboro population actually sees it and reads it. You may get the Granite State, but you may never even look for the announcements. And so, I'm not saying that it shouldn't be done. All I'm doing is this the best way to do it? And it may be that in this day and age, getting people to focus on an internet solution where you go to the town website, perhaps the website has it easier to find these notices, but maybe that is ultimately the way we may want to go.
Yeah, I was just wondering if all the town bodies should, if it should be everyone doing the same thing. Conservation Commission, Board of Selectmen, don't you have to publish? Or just your public hearings?
Yeah, we have to, as far as our agendas and public meetings have to be, there's a certain time frame they have to be published, I think it's 24 hours minimum.
Okay, but not in the only things that you put in the paper are your actual public, when you
Public
have
hearings.
public hearing,
Right.
I think.
We have to, the agendas are noticed. Your agendas are noticed on your website.
On the website.
On the website,
right.
I think we post them on the town hall also.
Yeah, and that's legal now.
Right,
Right,
right.
yeah, right.
Well,
And
let's not forget the website also allows people to put their name and email address and then select under news and updates. If you want anything, anytime somebody poses news or an update to the electric department or Parks and Rec or meeting agendas for selectmen, capital improvement, conservation, planning board, police, et cetera, you can check the box, and every time somebody uploads an agenda, you get an email.
Yeah, I routinely do that, Madam Chairman.
yes, I do
I'm
too.
sure you do too.
Yes, I do too. I'm just concerned about some of our, well, especially zoning amendments, but what you're saying, Mike, is that this is an either or.
No, this is just gives us additional flexibility if we
Right.
want it. We don't have to change what we're doing now, but if we did want to change what we're doing now, we couldn't unless we made this change
Right.
in the rules of procedure.
Right. But isn't this saying that we can, the proposal is that we can either post it just on the town website.
And two other
or-
places.
in the two places, or put it in the paper.
Or continue doing what we're doing now, right? All they're doing is allowing the website to take the place of a newspaper of general circulation if we want to.
Okay, how do you folks feel about that?
I always question whether or not we're trying to educate people by notifying them and they can read and see what's coming up. So in that sense, would you expand your publications or limit your publications?
What do you mean?
I mean, like the Conway Sun, the Sun Times. I look at that one, it's got stuff from Ossipee and stuff in it, and that's, so are you trying to educate people by the things that are coming up so that they can learn about them, or are you just trying to cover your bases so that you've notified a certain few when
I think you misunderstand, John. I read the Conway Daily Sun more than I read the Granite State because it's got more interesting stuff, local interest, than the Granite State does anymore. But no, this change in the rules of procedure doesn't mean that we don't have to put it in the Conway Sun if we want to, or the Laconia Citizen, or Foster's Daily Democrat if we want to. But we have to state in our rules of procedure where the notices go. And the state statute says they can go here, here, and here. So that's all that it's doing. It doesn't mean that we will not do it elsewhere or can't do it elsewhere. It just means this is where we have to do it. That's all.
Yeah, well, I think the more you can encourage people to see what's going on in your community, the more they understand the details and what's going on, and then they can, they can log in.
Agreed.
Okay, go ahead, Julie.
Should this say and or? Because you've got
Shouldn't it say and or?
a paper of general or the town website. Can't it be and? Are we ever going to do both and just always have it on the website?
The or is not exclusive. It doesn't mean that you either do it this way or that way.
Okay.
It just means you can do it, it basically
Yeah, 'cause
means
I
and
agree
or.
with John, more is better and some of these things are free, so,
But
post them everywhere.
this language is right out of the statute.
Okay, as long as it's good.
And there are other elements of this too. I mean, right now, the subdivision regulations state specifically it has to be noticed in the paper. So even if you were to adopt this change right now, the rules of procedure would allow you to change, but there would still have to be a subsequent change to subdivision regulations. It's probably also in site plan regulations. So the board would have the ability then to modify the subdivision. Nobody wants to look in the paper about subdivisions. That can just go on the internet. That's a hypothetical decision. Or site plan review. We already tell the abutters and we'll stick that one on there, but it doesn't have to go in the paper. So you're not really changing what's happening, even if you were to adopt this right now. You're just allowing the flexibility to be in line with the statute. So there's other decisions that have to follow after this.
Okay, and any other thoughts, or are you folks all comfortable moving ahead with this?
Yes.
It requires 2 readings, Mike?
Requires one reading after this. The next
Well,
meeting, we
no,
adopt these.
This one and then the next one.
This is our first reading, and the
Right.
next time we read it again, and then we adopt them.
Right, okay. So, all set?
Yeah, I would be a proponent of more. Like Julie said, the more places we can get it in, the better off we are.
Do you want that written into the rules of procedure, that we have to put it into newspapers and then list the newspapers we have to put it into?
I think, isn't our,
I know, I take your point. The more the people know about what we're doing, the better, because we work for them. And that's a fine thing. All that these are supposed to do is, like you said, cover the requirements. If we want to do more, we can.
well, I don't really know, to tell you the truth. I'm deflecting to Tavis here.
Well, would just be the first reading. And so why doesn't everybody think about it, and then we'll put it on the next agenda, or?
Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah.
The only
Is
other
that
point,
okay, John?
Yep.
one of the reasons the state did this was looking at trying to be softer on, realizing that fewer and fewer people are getting the paper, and there's quite a cost to putting things in the paper. For example, right now, a site plan review application fee is $50. It's usually, I'll say, $200, $250 to put that notice in the paper. So we've already started working with Granite to say, look, can you make it smaller? It doesn't have to be 32-point font. It doesn't need a quarter of a page for a site plan hearing. Some municipalities put it in multiple papers, but they'll put it in the classifieds. It's not achieving your point, John, and getting more information into people's hands, but they are satisfying the requirement. So, I think what the legislature did is realize that people are starting to find the least expensive way to get the notice out there. But I understand the voter response of, hey, you're not even telling me what's going on. How am I supposed to be informed? So we could look at increasing fees, to put the burden on the project proponent for coming forward, and then keep it going everywhere. It honestly doesn't cost any more staff time to get it to the paper and get it on the website, et cetera. In today's world, it's an email and a post. But
I guess I would suggest that, I'm sympathetic to John's points, as in if you have something which is going to be somewhat major for the town, that should be in as many places as you can have it. At the same time, a site plan review for something which is basically for the abutters who have already been notified, and the planning board who is going to look at this with some seriousness, and we are part of, we're going to be there. That site plan review doesn't necessarily need to go to the entire population through a newspaper article. And so, to John's thinking, I think that it's important to get information out to people. At the same time, I think what is being presented here is putting our planning or our procedures in line with the state regulation. So it gives us the opportunity to do it in appropriate ways.
Right, and I think it's important for people to see in the paper when we're doing zoning amendments. I mean, that's one thing that we really want to get people's attention. But go ahead, Vaughn.
Yeah, I think that it should always have to be on the website. I mean, if I come in from out of town, I don't know what the local papers are that people are used to reading. I would presume I could always find notice on the website.
Okay.
But on the flip side of that, Kathy, I also see an awful lot of people that are older that are either giving up their computers, I see these people every day trying to do something, or left the workforce before they really started to use a computer and don't own one now. Those people are still reading the paper. If you say, oh, you can do that at the website of, their eyes roll up and they don't understand what you're talking about. So there's a big divide, let's say, of the people that just go, oh, just go on the website, and the other people that have not a clue, and it really should be done old school. It needs to be both ways.
I would also suggest that it would be very useful if there was one place on the town website where you could see all the hearing notices. And you could just have them all there, so you could, with one click, find out what's happening with Conservation Commission, Board of Selectmen, Planning Board, whatever. And that's, it just would make things easy so that you could end up finding them. And I do end up I hear about how it is hard to find information. And so maybe the website can be slightly redesigned.
Well, you can still sign up for all the notices.
Yeah.
Well, and to that end, and I can bring this up at a department head meeting if nowhere else, so the way the background of the website works, if I go into the planning board page and sign in, I have certain things that I can do on the planning board page. I can add documents, I can add links, I can add agendas, everything you're used to seeing. I can also add an event. So if the planning board was going to have a special meeting on Friday, I would go to the planning board page, log in, drop down an event for Friday. When you create that event, you can add an agenda to it, so that ostensibly when somebody goes, this doesn't work across the board right now, but it can be orchestrated so that when somebody goes to the home page and they go to the calendar and they see planning board meeting, they click on that link and they get the agenda. It can be done that way. So in a perfect world, when agendas start, the planning board starts working on its work plan, and we're going to meet in this, second meeting in February, second meeting in March, etc., that agenda can always be updated and modified. So every time that agenda gets more information on it, it builds. So people can start looking at the calendar instead of, okay, I've got to go to Wolfeboro, then I've got to go to boards and commissions and planning board and agenda. You don't have to drill down all the time. But that's a learning curve for everybody that's posting agendas on the website as well. But it is doable.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I would entertain a motion.
So moved, first reading.
Seconded.
Okay, motion has been made and seconded to, let's see, that we have had the first reading on the rules of procedure.
Correct.
And another one will be scheduled at our next regularly scheduled meeting. So I'm going to do a roll call for everyone who is in favor of this or not in favor of it. Susan Replier.
Yes.
Mike Hodder.
Yes.
John Thurston.
Yes.
Brad Harriman.
Yes.
Peter Goodwin.
Yes.
And Von Dugan.
Yes.
And Kathy Barnard. I'm in favor of the motion. Okay, thank you. Thanks, folks. Let's see, the next item is public comment. Is there any member of the public out there? I don't believe so. So I'll move on to any other business before we do the minutes. Okay, then, does anybody have any issues with the January 5th, 2021 minutes? Any corrections?
Not for me, Madam Chairman.
Oh, they look good to me. I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Seconded.
Motion has been made and seconded. Roll call vote. Susan Replier.
Abstain, I wasn't here.
Mike Hodder.
Yes.
John Thurston.
Yes.
Brad Harriman.
Yes.
Peter Goodwin.
Yes.
Von Dugan.
Yes.
And Kathy Barnard, I vote yes. Okay, that's it, folks.
Move to adjourn.
All right. Move and second.
Second.
And we're adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.